Wow, this is a good one. So I was all into the campaign back in 2024 and all excited, the day that we voted. Actually, I early voted, but on election day, I was all excited. And I woke up the next day and just my whole world crashed. I needed somewhere to vent, so I vented on Threads, and for some reason, it just took off. These are real people. Like, these are people that'll change your tire or jump you off in the Kroger parking lot or read the bulletin board for you when it's embarrassing to stand there like a bird doing this.
I think that there are Republicans and there are MAGA, and then there's the hardcore MAGA. But the platform that they've bought into, Susan, that bothers me, the MAGA in particular and the hardcore, is it's a platform of fear and hate.
That is a very large factor, in all honesty, because when you feel ineffective and you feel like there's nothing you can personally do about something that's stretching you and worrying you, sometimes the easiest thing to do is throw your hands up and say, fuck it, pick one and roll with it, and let's hope this turns out all right. If ICE came into our factory, there are some of those MAGAs that would jump over there and hold the door while our immigrants, got out. Like, they would, because they're friends with them. That's a dichotomy that is hard.
I'm like, but if you've got a man who's working like Susan, who's working 67 hours a week, trying to just pay his mortgage and go to the movies with his kids, and he's just trying to live his life.
The way the current system is set up, that is because people down here have a mindset like they're picking a football team and cheering for the Super Bowl.
You go to them and you're like, okay, guess what? You just lost overtime because you voted for that, and help them connect the dots that, and not, I think, fuck around and find out, or I told you so. This is the worst I told you so in the history of I told you so's.
That's a good point. How many times have you read something and go, oh, I didn't know that. That's a good point. I need to go check that out.
Oh, yeah,
I do it all the time.
They get tired of being scared all the time. And as in the same way that Harris gave us hope, Trump has given them hope.
I try to do that even more so now, to approach them on a human level and see if there's some kind of way to connect.
Well, hello and welcome to yet another episode of Hopeful Resistance. My name is Sarah. This is my son, Aaron.
Hi.
And today we are super excited to welcome our guest, Susan Delaine Daniels. Hello, Susan.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I enjoyed talking to you.
It is such a pleasure to have you join us today. And for a little backstory, I started following Susan on Threads, I don't know, a couple months ago, I guess. And oh my God, she is, in her own words, a storyteller and an accidental activist. And she's agreed to come on today and just talk about her experience. She has changed my perception in terms of how I look at MAGA folks. And so today we're just going to have Susan. Susan, I just would love for you to just start with, how the heck did you become an accidental activist?
Yeah, I'd like to hear that too, actually.
Wow, this is a good one. So I was all into the campaign back in 2024 and all excited, the day that we voted. Actually, I early voted, but on election day, I was all excited. And I woke up the next day and just my whole world crashed. I was working 6 and 7 days a week, 10-hour shifts in a factory surrounded by a whole lot of MAGA leaning people. No, MAGA people, period, not just leaning, some lean. And due to some things that happened in my past with my MAGA dad passing away with COVID and taking my mom with him, and the feelings of guilt of not doing enough to try to change his mind and listen more and engage more than argue, I have a regret from that. So I just decided, okay, I've got to do something. I feel so helpless. I've got to do something. So I started gathering up facts and little tidbits and things that I knew would work for them, you know, like that wasn't quote liberal propaganda, to share with them and maybe try to help change your mind a little bit. It just made me feel like I had something to do. It gave me something to go research. It gave me a point when I went to work to try to work it in. And I had at the time 236 followers on Threads. I've been on Threads since the beginning. And I just started venting about some of the absurdities that happened during those conversations, because I don't really have anybody in my life physically that share the same politics with me other than my daughter. And she's so consumed with work and kids and stuff that she votes, but she's not really interested in talking about it all the time. She's just like, you give me the highlights and I'll do it. I know, not great, but that's a whole conversation within itself,
Yeah, it's
actually.
okay.
People like that.
Better than
But
nothing.
I needed somewhere to vent, so I vented on Threads, and for some reason it just took off. People started liking it. And, you know, in the midst of the stories is I share articles and with pithy comments and opinions on them, and, you know, share information, do things like that. And I guess it resonated with people. It's surreal to be living in a 12 by 28 foot tiny house in my daughter's backyard, driving a Nissan Kicks, 5 years old, and working in a factory. And then I've got this whole little side life where I'm out protesting in the streets and protesting online and sharing and boosting.
I'll tell you what I think it really resonated with people. You are an authentic and excellent storyteller. And your stories are not about glorifying you. That's the whole reason we wanted you on as a guest. This isn't, I'm so great and I'm so savvy and I'm such a great, you know, debater. Your most profound thing that I remember reading, and you said it to me in some of our conversations, these are real people and they're not all bad. And so I love how you humanize them in your stories, and you really do reveal through your stories that many of them believe what they do because in your most recent story, their grandpa told them, or that's just how they were raised, or they don't have all the information. But your passion for storytelling and helping them see what they're doing, it's incredible. I know when I turned Aaron on to you, he was like, wow, she can tell a story.
Yeah. It's almost the same thing. Like just reading through. Whenever I would knew that you were gonna come on the show, I try to just go and see what people are talking about, and it was a lot of that. But I think too that I like that you're also like the way that you share the things that, for example, that you're passionate about. And then I also like that every once in a while you like throw memes in there. I think you did one where it's like it looks like a Simpsons character and it just says I didn't think it was gonna be me, or I didn't think it was gonna affect me with the Make America Great.
I
Yeah,
And I
I
was
thought
just
other people were going to pay the time because he cracked me up because he reminds me so much of some of the guys I work with.
yeah.
Right. When the tariffs took our overtime away 3 weeks ago, we used to work mandatory, 60-hour weeks. And then there was a lot of voluntary on Sunday for that double time. And
Right.
all that's gone. And I'd been warning them and they didn't listen. And then when it hit, then they had questions. And I'm not going to lie, my patience well was dry that night. I lost it on them and told them, I'm not your mama. And you got a phone, Google it. Like
Yeah.
maybe in a few days. And a few days later, I did talk with them. But I was just like the frustration gets to me a lot too. Don't get me wrong. It's just,
That's so human. That's yeah.
it's no point dwelling on that. And back to your point about these are real people. Like these are people that'll change your tire or jump you off in the Kroger parking lot or read the bulletin board for you when it's embarrassing to stand there like a bird doing this,
That was a great,
trying to read it.
I love that
Yeah,
story.
like, and he has mild dyslexia. Yeah, he goes to the trouble to do that because he understands. He's a little to me. He seems a little neurospicy and just march to his own drum like I do. And once we got to know each other a little better, working closer, because I've worked around him for 2 years, and we would say hey and hi and speak occasionally, but it's just been since I transferred into the area where he works that I've really gotten to know him, and he's opened my eyes a lot. Like, I already knew that these are really not bad people. They just are scared and they're losing what they did have or not able to get what they need, and they see everything eroding around them, and their lives are so full trying to survive and keep everything going, the kids, the jobs, the ball games, the overtime, the this or that it's really easy to stay low information, so it's easier to get duped. Now, yeah, you have your hardcore core variety that are just unreachable.
I'd love your feedback. I think that there are Republicans and there are MAGA, and then there's the hardcore MAGA. But the platform that they've bought into, Susan, that bothers me, the MAGA in particular and the hardcore, is it's a platform of fear and hate. Would you agree with that, or do you see something different? Because you're in the trenches with them.
I agree to a large degree, although I will point out the difference. I agree that the former is definitely applying. However, hate, from my perspective of the people around me that I know, they're cool with the immigrants around here. They're friends with them. They do things with them. It's not a hate there. They hate what's going on, and they hate being scared all the time. So when there's a bandwagon to jump on that's giving them an outlet for that frustration, a lot of them are doing it for that purposes. And it seems as if they're really racist, but yet if ICE came into our factory, there are some of those MAGAs that would jump over there and hold the door while our immigrants, got out. Like, they would, because they're friends with them. That's a dichotomy that is hard.
Right. I mean, do you think it's still like that thing that was similar to like the terrorist thing? It's because they don't feel like these things are going to affect their life? Or do you think it's more like they like enough of the other things that they're kind of overlooking the more negative side?
I think that
Or is it something else?
dry and boring politics, as they call it, of discussing policy and things like that goes over a lot of people's heads, including mine on a lot of it. So definitely not looking down on anybody there.
Right.
But those things that get condensed down to certain issues like that and then get pushed by the team that sounds like they're taking their side is appealing, because you're not really looking deep into it. That is the hugest problem that I have found here in the South with voters, and not just MAGA, but the ones that didn't vote. They just don't consume enough to understand the gravity of what's going on.
Right.
And it's literally, we make these FIFO jokes, but the honest truth is it takes FIFO most of the time. They've got to fuck around and find out how it's actually going to affect them and see the fallout from that. And then sometimes that's when you start seeing these people that were just voting that way out of habit, tradition, sounded good at the time, appealed to the upset that they're feeling, whatever more shallow reasons, not the hardcore people. Those are the ones that right now we're seeing the stories about that are like, oh, hold up, the shit is getting too deep. Like,
yeah, you definitely seeing a
I
lot
want
of
off
that.
this boat.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
know.
going to be a lot
I
more
know.
of that the more of these things that happen. We'll be seeing more and more of that, in my opinion.
More and more of that.
But you know what? My
Yeah.
question, actually, I think you've connected a few dots for me. I have been pretty committed to the belief that there's hate involved with the MAGA platform. But you iterated, I think, quite clearly that they're trying to survive. They're afraid of losing whatever they can lose because they're literally just trying to feed their family, pay their bills, whatever. But when someone comes along and says, the thing you're afraid of losing may be taken away from you by these green
The other
marshals.
side.
But if you hear it enough, it becomes what you think. If that messaging is what's always being pushed at you, your fear is going to eventually override your common sense if you are low information. And a majority of people here now in the South, I can't speak for the rest of the country, although common sense tells me that it has to hold true everywhere. We get all of our information from such fractured and sporadic sources, and so many of them are in bubbles, that it's very easy for people to become brainwashed.
I do believe there's hate involved, but I don't think it's hate. It's hate of the green Martians or the silver blue-haired beings or whatever. It isn't that they hate them. They hate the thought that they're going to lose something, so they need to blame it on somebody.
Especially something that they have such
Yeah.
substantial value for, right? Because this, like you said, Susan, like they're thinking about their families, they're thinking about their, I mean, their homes, their way of life, like things that are very important to them become a substantial part of like of who they are. And then now someone's telling them like, hey, you're gonna lose that if if you don't support what my policies, my things, the stuff that I want to do. So it's interesting.
And I think a part of it here is also a big distrust of government. And I don't mean this
Of course.
conspiracy theory level types, but a distrust based on how many times things have happened that have been eroding the middle class. And it just becomes more and more accepted.
Right.
The cognitive dissonance of seeing that happen, of living in it down here as a blue collar person, and having to fight harder and harder and do more and more to hold everything together, is based on the fact that all of these things governmentally, locally and nationally, are slowly eroding at that. The
So
part that surprises me though is, where are the critical skills of sitting back and thinking, okay, all this shit is going to hell in the handbasket. What needs to be done to stop it? And who sounds like they're going to be doing that the closest to the way I want it to be done? That's the part of the disconnect I can't understand.
that's what I was
They
kind of
stop
just about
at
to
the
ask
hate
about.
of it happening and then focus that hate where they're told to focus it, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Well, this was the interesting
that's
thing,
what's
because you're talking about the erosion of the middle class, and here we have someone who comes along and says, I want to rebuild the middle class. I want to support trade. I want to like trade skills. Do you think, and I'm putting you on the spot, and but do you think, I know that you said that the MAGA don't seem to be racist, but do you think the fact that Kamala Harris was a Black woman played in significantly to the voting of the MAGA and the people that that are MAGA?
In general, yes. I don't think it's as much that she was Black with the people I know.
Right,
But, even for MAGAs, my family, we have a lot of different races in our family, so they've become desensitized to that part of it. So that could be the reason. And there is racism. I don't deny that. And there is a lot of hate. I'm saying it's not all umbrellaed under that. Sometimes the reasoning behind that hate and why it gets directed where it does and appears as if it does is really not necessarily the way it is. It could have been what I said. It often is based on people I know.
And I would,
But I think it was more that she was a woman. And in this case, it was against Trump. And this man talks on the level that the people around here talk. He does a lot of the things that they do. They see who they want to be. They want to be that loud, stand back up to all the bullshit and make sweeping changes and not, just fix it.
yeah.
They
So
don't see that it's not fixing it.
and so you think that's the thing that too, because I make it a point to try and watch a lot of his speeches and a lot of his rallies, and so I definitely understand what you're saying. I wonder, I had like whenever people, for example, pressed him like at the debates, like, well, how are you going to do that? What policies are you planning to enact? And he didn't really answer that question. Do you think it's just, do you think people aren't even worried about it because they just want things to be kind of fixed? Or do you you really? Okay, yeah. I just didn't know if it was
Well, but
more
this-
than that.
That is a very large factor, in all honesty, because when you feel ineffective and you feel like there's nothing you can personally do about something that's stressing you and worrying you, sometimes the easiest thing to do is throw your hands up and say, fuck it. Pick one and roll with it, and let's hope this turns out all right.
Yeah, for sure. Like kind of live with your
You know,
choice. This is the choice
this
I'm
is
making.
a perfect explanation. It gives me the simplest answer is usually the right one, correct? So it was unfathomable to me that anybody actually liked him, but you have explained it in a way that makes a lot of sense. They see this loud, brash, swaggering guy who they perceive as a billionaire with real money. And, you know, he cares about me and he's going to fix it. Although, you know, those of us, I always say, those of us who have been with a narcissist or a sociopath see this guy coming a mile away. But he's saying
Yeah.
to hear, and they're trying to survive. What I hear you saying is a lot of the people that really supported this administration, voted for this administration, are literally trying to survive. They don't have time to dig deep. They don't have time to look at the statistics. They don't have time to look at the
That is
actual resources.
yes. This is a thing that I've regularly talked to some of my friends that voted for Kamala in the exact same conversation. I just can't understand when people like Trump. And I go, I like, look, man, we're all pretty dialed in because we spend a lot of time and we invest a lot of time into like knowing this stuff and being informed on these things because that's the stuff that we care about. I'm like, but if you've got a man who's working like Susan, who's working 67 hours a week, trying to just pay his mortgage and go to the movies with his kids and like he's just trying to live his life. He doesn't have time to get dialed into all this stuff that's going on around him. He just wants to work and spend time with his family. You can't expect that guy to have like the full like breadth of information that we do.
He
So
doesn't
he's
have
going to
the
vote
emotional energy. I mean, Susan
right.
nailed it when
Yeah.
she look, I'm working 60 hours a week and you care, Susan, and it's still work for you. So imagine if someone does not have the bandwidth, the emotional bandwidth to hunt this down.
And the civic education to understand the ramifications of what they're reading.
Right.
Those, when I was in high school, we still had civics class.
Right.
We had to take it, and I learned those things that stuck with me. That's not in the curriculum down here anymore, and it hasn't been in a couple, maybe 3 decades.
I don't
Wow.
want to I don't want to get too far away from one of the things I wanted to ask you to do today. I would love it if there is a recent story. I know we haven't revealed the special thing that we're going to do together, but we'll maybe talk about that later. But you are a consummate storyteller. And so is there a story that you feel like just is at the top of your brain right now that you would love to share? Maybe something recent or something at the beginning? Just a story that you'd like to share with the folks who are watching today?
Well, yeah, there is one that made an impression on me. I had written a little quick thing about the guys were talking, and they weren't talking to me, they were talking to each other, but I was close enough to overhear the conversation. And they were discussing the Pete Hegseth and Signalgate. And one said to the other, I don't know, man. I don't know if Dusty's taking it, a little too hard because he was in the military and he's just all up in arms, really pushing to us that this is a bad thing and dude needs to get kicked out. Because I mean, I ain't really seen nothing about them Democrats really getting all together in one big group and fighting it back. And if it was that bad, like Watergate, they would be on it. Well, I wrote about that. Not all of it. I didn't put in the Watergate part because threads, but that was the actual conversation. So it got me to thinking when this lady posted and she gave some of those generalizations that people give about MAGA. I said, well, of course they're not going to believe it because blah, blah, blah. And she comes out with a few of the stereotypes. And I looked at it and I almost punched the heart, and then I couldn't. Like, I can't. Like, I didn't agree with it. So I said, I respectfully disagree. You are not understanding that for these guys, we're not saying that I was not included in the conversation. It was between the two of them, and they both are MAGA supporters. They were using the Democratic Party's unified response and roar back at something that would be atrocious, the reaction you would expect, the reaction they see from their side, they were expecting. And because they hadn't seen that anywhere, they're thinking, yeah, no, he just got his panties in a wad and got really upset over this because of his military background.
So
The point with that is they were using the Democratic response as a yardstick to measure whether or not they needed to be worried by. If they didn't care about that response at all, would that have even been a yardstick to measure by?
That's pretty powerful.
So I
Yeah.
told her that, and I said, your supposition is based on preconceived notions from stereotypes, and my opinion is based on working elbow to elbow with these guys and being friends with them for the last 2 years for 70 hours a week. So
I don't work that grind anymore, but I'm familiar with it. So I resonate with what you're saying. When you're working that close with people for that, I mean, I used to joke that I spent more time with the guys I was working with than I did at my house. So you get really, really close.
work has custody and home gets
Yeah.
visitation. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
see, think about this with those guys. I am 58 years old. My kids are grown. I help out with my grandkids, but they're my daughter's responsibility. When I get off work, my time is mine for the most part. They have children. They have wives. They have ball games to get them to. They have all these things to do. So they really don't. And people say, well, you need to make time. But okay, yeah, you should. But this is real life. People don't make time for boring things or things that confuse them. So a lot of the time, this type of person, the blue collar people, and not just the MAGAs, but even the people that lean liberal down here, tend to take their cues from the messaging that's coming out.
Right.
And people keep complaining about MAGAs and Fox. Well, it's true that down here, Fox 17 is the channel of choice because of the shows that it plays and stuff, and their news is pretty much the news of choice. But it's really easy with the fractured state of how everybody gets their news today to leave out certain things. And when the message is not unified, when there's not a one big front pushing the same messaging constantly, that would have to get in Fox News, because then it's a head-to-head battle, and they've got, they've got to show both things. As things stand right now, with it being different people like Bernie and AOC and their Fight the Oligarchy tour, and you got your Chris Murphys and your other people over here doing different things, fighting back. You can attack those individuals, which is what Republicans and MAGA does, and steer that ire toward them. Whereas, in my opinion, if it were more consolidated and put with a good mouthpiece or two or three out there, that like Pete, when he would go on Fox,
Oh my God.
where that was the more default mode than the way it is now, I think a lot more people like that would start seeing the type of things that would engage those critical thinking skills that are dormant. It's not that they don't have them. It's just too hard to pull them out and use them when they're so busy with everything else. And they don't think they need to, because they're living in a bubble hearing what they need to hear to keep them in that state.
Well, one of the things that
actually brings no, that answers the question. I was just going to ask, well, what do you think because if we're talking, if we can all sit in this call and we can say, well, we can look and know that the policies that the Dems have tried to push forward over the years would benefit the blue collar workers that live in these, that are living with these struggles. Do you think that like the solution is more like like what you're saying, just a Democrat united front is the answer, like where they all kind of where we coalesce, if you will? Or do you think it's
Not
something
on that subject. I was speaking on things like Signalgate and these things where people think that, they want to use stereotypical reasons to say why MAGA's not worried about Signalgate or pushing for him to lose his job and those other things. I would say that was what I was talking about there.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, with the messaging like that, that is the problem. if you want to know my opinion on it, and it's nothing we can do about it, the way the current system is set up, that is because people down here have a mindset like they're picking a football team and cheering for the Super Bowl. So if they're on one side or the other, it's a fight back and forth thing. The fact that we only have two parties and the Democrats are the ones that bring those ideas to the table, it's often going to be rejected by them because they're already ingrained into voting conservative for the various reasons we've discussed earlier.
Okay.
Maybe, I mean, I'm not saying starting a third party. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to figure all those things out.
Yeah,
I know I'm an independent. I'm an independent.
I will say every
and I vote Democrat because they are closest to my very progressive values. If I'm that way on the liberal side, do you not think that there's a lot of people on that side that are voting that way, even though it doesn't really match their values, but it comes closer than the other side, or it scratches another itch? That plays into it.
I definitely think there's people on both, like, regardless of your political affiliations, there's people that vote Republican or Democrat because they've always voted Republican and Democrat. We talked about that with our last guest, where it's like, if you live your life where it's always one thing all the time, trying to change that, even something small, it takes such a substantial, like glass breaking moment for you to be like, oh, I was wrong. I need to change my behavior, the way that I think, the way that I act, and so it's easy for most people that they never will, because this is, I mean, what are you talking about? This is how I am. This is who I am.
You know, one of the things I think I've learned from reading your stories is the reason I think you've resonated. I want to go back. I mean, you went from 200 followers to 36,000 followers, and that's not because of any one thing other than, I believe, A, you're a great storyteller, but B, I think you've reminded us that in order to reach the MAGA folks, the people who believe so differently from us, you have to find that common ground. It's respectful resistance. You go to them and you're like, okay, guess what? You just lost overtime because you voted for that, and help them connect the dots that, you know, and not, I think, fuck around and find out, or I told you so. This is the worst I told you so in the history of I told you so's.
I agree. And while it holds appeal in the long run, it's not going to accomplish enough.
No. But I think you are making headway. And if nothing else, I want to bring this part up because you and Aaron are eye to eye. Your conversations with some of these folks, like you're talking to Joe, I'm just picking a name. So you're talking to Joe, and you know in your head you are never going to change his mind. But you also know that Dusty is over here listening to you. And you know that Dusty is going to benefit from that. And I really think, I mean, Aaron's passionate about that as well.
Yeah, I call it planting the seed, you know, where it's just about, like, if I'm arguing with somebody online, or I'm arguing with somebody in Discord, and I don't really, I don't argue much with people in person. Maybe that's because people don't want to argue in person, or I don't know, but that's the first thing I think about, is that a lot of people aren't going to change their mind.
They can't Google in front of you, but when they're arguing.
Right. And that ties in with what I pointed out earlier about people that just don't have the time to go really look into issues. Sometimes when they're overhearing those conversations, or they're reading one in the comment section of a respectful discourse, they're like, huh, that's a good point. How many times have you read something and go, oh, I didn't know that. That's a good point. I need to go check that out. I do it all the time.
All the time.
So they do too. I'd say that, right? You nailed it, Aaron.
Yeah.
You know, interestingly enough, the other thing that I have seen, and I love it, you are not always about coddling. Sometimes you're like, well, you're just a dumbass. You're acting stupid. You're behaving badly. You know, you're not.
What did you said earlier? I'm not your mother. I'm not your mama. You got a phone.
I'm not your fucking mama. It's not my
Yeah.
job to take care of you and spoon feed you what you need to know. You
Yeah.
voted for this, deal with it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I got two, you get two. Yeah, because I mean, like I said, I'm friends with these people or family, and that's just the way all of us are. You know, that stereotypical blue collar rowdy humor is a stereotype for a reason. We do have that, and I know when to make jokes about things and when to be serious about something, just the way you do on anything outside of politics with friends and people you know and might oppose on an issue with. It's just a natural thing where if you're an empathetic person, you might want to make your point and make people laugh, but you don't want to hurt someone in the process. Like I
Right.
would never tell if once one of my friends came to me to ask me some questions, I would never look at them and go, "Look here, you such a dumbass. I fucking told you this was gonna happen. Now let me break it for you down like a shotgun again." You
Yeah.
know, I would never talk to somebody that way. Where I would do it to the group when I'm upset, I would never do that one-on-one because that's demeaning and degrading, and I wouldn't want anybody doing it to me.
Right.
So it's just, you know, it's one of the people pleasing social skills you learn as a woman of my generation here in the South. You know, it was ingrained into us to, if you ain't got nothing nice, don't say nothing at all. Well, my generation come along, I was like, well, I can say what I think. Let me just try to make it a little nice.
Put a little
You
sugar
know,
in that tea.
Yeah, a little sugar in that tea.
Well, so let me, one of the things that I've noticed you're doing more of, and I'd like for you to talk about it, is the protesting.
oh,
You're having some interesting experiences with that, but it also seems like Aaron and I follow a lot of the news, and it does seem like the protesting is now starting to be covered by the news outlets. It does seem like certainly the Take Down Tesla campaign. Apparently, this weekend there were 200 protests at Teslas across the state. A
I
Tesla.
saw that there
there's
were,
several in Tennessee. The Indivisible Tennessee has been doing it for several weeks now at the Tesla dealership in Franklin, Knoxville, and Nashville for sure. And I think in Chattanooga, because one of the ways that I help in my activism is by sharing protest videos from all over,
Right.
especially on protest days, because so many of them aren't making the news and so many are being squashed. The more we get them viral quickly, and when you have a lot of followers that are also interested in the same thing, stands to reason that's going to help, you know, spread and amplify. So that's one of the ways I do it. Actually protesting myself, first one I ever did, I organized it myself there in Threads because I couldn't find any active resistance groups here in my immediate area, only
right.
in Nashville or the big cities. And that's too far and too much for me to deal with, which is a problem that needs to be addressed. And luckily, a professor at MTSU, a history professor, decided to take on the task of starting up an indivisible Murfreesboro here recently. And I joined in with them. And they have partnered with Tennesseans for Democracy, which is a grassroots group. And we're doing a hands-off march around the Murfreesboro Square and then down Church Street and then to
I'm on
line Broad Street.
I'm on your Threads page and I'm looking at this hands-off thing. We must stop the current administration, their illegal billionaire power grab. So I won't even, the reason I didn't read it is I won't say their names.
Right.
That's why
Well,
I say,
they tell us to bring signs and we're going to peacefully march around. And there's already, at the little one I did on March the 4th for Democracy, we had 11 people show up, and then we had 2 join in from
right.
around the neighborhood in the office behind us on his lunch break, but he had to go back. So at any given time, there were between 8 and 12 people protesting for the 2 hours we did it. This one that is coming up in April, there are double or triple that already registered. And this week we'll probably pick up a lot more. So even here in the very, very beating heart of Ruby Red, Tennessee, people are starting to mobilize. They're starting to see all these things. They're starting to get really upset about the Social Security issues and all this other stuff. And with groups like Indivisible and Tennesseans for Democracy, they're not affiliated with Democrats or Republicans. They're just for Tennesseans that don't like what's going on and want to join together to protest it.
I think this
That's
is,
I'm
awesome,
hoping I'll run
actually.
into some of the conservative voters that have joined and maybe get to talk to one of them at it. I'm going to see if I can find that opportunity and
Well,
keep
and
an eye out for it.
it's awesome that it's not party bound, because then, because it you know, let's say the next president swaps parties and people might still be unhappy. It still lets them use those resources to organize. So that's actually really cool
Very good
to me.
point. And down here, it eliminates an automatic bias that
Right.
is ingrained with that sports mentality against Democrats.
well,
Yeah.
one of the
That's
interesting
really
things
cool.
that Aaron and I found out about or were tuned into early on with the podcast was the formula that if 3.5% of a population mobilizes, not necessarily all together, but if they mobilize to protest, they mobilize to speak out, they mobilize to strike, they mobilize to boycott, that 3.5% can change the course of history. They can change what's happening in government. And in the United States, Susan, 3.5% is only like 11 million people. In a country of 360 some million people, you know, that's not a lot, 3.5%. And I think we're actually getting to that benchmark.
Well, we were saying, I was telling Susan, thanks for Indivisible, because some of my friends, my close high school friends that live around here, one of them expressed interest in trying to go to something. I told him weekends are pretty much the only opportunity I have if I'm gonna do, like, boots on the ground protest. So I was just saying thanks for telling me about Indivisible, because I already found something.
I was telling him that I have been, even though my Facebook is just for family and friends, I've been posting some of those flyers from the Indivisible on there saying that I was going out marching. And I was telling Aaron about recently on Facebook, I posted a meme of like a Walking Dead zombie. And it said if Project 2025 was a person. And in the body of it, I put Project 2025 is, all jokes aside, Project 2025 is really bad for working class Americans, no matter what party you're in.
Yeah.
So if you've got questions about what's going on with it, feel free to hit me up. I've got a copy. I can share it with you, or I can find the parts you're curious about and pull them out and show it to you, and we can have a talk about it. Respectful, just, you know, learning about something that could really hurt you so that you're aware of what's going on. And I was telling him, I haven't had any takers yet, but it goes back to what we were talking earlier about planting seeds. By doing that, the people in my family and friends that saw that will know that in future, if they do have questions, even if they didn't want to talk about it now, if they have questions later on when things start getting worse, as we know they will, they'll be like, oh, you know what? She said she had a copy of that and she would be willing to look it up.
Did you know that there is a Project 2025 tracker online that shows how far they are with each of the initiatives?
Mm-hmm. I've
It's
got that. Some of my Threads followers have given it to me, and the comic book, the graphic novel, rather, of the breakdown of what all Project 2025 does. I have that to show to some of the guys.
You have to share the link to that because I've not seen
Yeah,
that.
that sounds way cooler.
Yeah, wait.
Um,
Yeah,
did
I'll
did
have to
did
go look it up.
Okay.
did we check
I've got
off
it saved.
them using? Because I know one of the big people I watch online read through the whole thing, and I know that one of the things they talked about is them using apps like Signal to try and basically get away from
It's
freedom of
absolutely,
information.
it's
And
ab-
I haven't gone to check the tracker recently, but I was just wondering if that got checked off, because now we have confirmation that they're
Good
using
question. Yeah, see, I
that they're using
used
them.
back when I first started writing my stories. One of the first ones was about a conversation I had with Dave about how if that got instituted, our overtime, this was before tariffs were even a worry. This was back before the election when I was trying to warn them ahead of time. I told him, look, if they win and they start putting this into play a few months from now, this is what's going to happen. The place where, like where we work, would be able to make you work 50 or 60 hours one week, 2 weeks,
Yep.
and then they could come back and have you work minimum amount of hours and do that swap out with somebody else, put the other person working more and less when you're working more, and they could juggle us to cut out a lot of our overtime. Because then, even though we worked overtime that week, we wouldn't meet that 160 an hour a month threshold to be paid overtime for those hours. So it would all be straight time, unlike it is now. And of course, they were like, really? And like, that would be crazy. And I don't like that, but I don't think it'll happen. So I'm just waiting for that to come around, because
No.
we all know that places like the employers like that will salivate to jump on being able to cut one of their biggest costs, which is the biggest cost, which is labor costs,
Labor, yeah.
by a significant amount, just by juggling that
Juggling the
within
time
those new
around.
parameters.
I mean, it's crazy to hear the doubt on that end, because I mean, I have friends that work in retail, and they were already seeing that, like even
Yeah.
before the current administration, they started seeing the juggle around.
I think the thing that bothers me are the number of people who are saying, well, it's just temporary, and they warned us it was going to be difficult and blah, blah, blah.
That's the self-fulfilling prophecy kind of logic. Is, well, they
Right.
said it was going to be hard like this. I mean,
Susan,
so
let me
it's
ask you
fine.
a question. Have you heard of, right, the day before the inauguration, one of the very last things that Biden and Harris did is they published a document called the National Resilience Strategy. Have you heard of that?
No.
I'm going to send you a link because I am astonished at the number of people who didn't know about this document that they literally published the day before they left. And so it's in the National Archives. No one can take it down or take it away. It is a document that outlines how to resist. Essentially, it's how do you resist what's happening right now? And it has 4 pillars, which are, community, government, infrastructure, but it's talking about what people can do. I'm going to send that to you because I think you'll be astonished at.
Oh, I would love to have it. And I think the reason a lot of people didn't know about it is the same reason I don't, because we were so trauma shocked, shell shocked,
100%.
scared, and existential dread, because that day before you knew what was about to happen. The vibe was there. If you think about how many people were on thread saying, I'm so hopeful, but,
Yeah.
like, I went to bed that night before the results because I knew something in my soul told me you're going to wake up to a dystopian hell tomorrow. Get ready for it. And when I did, I just sat there and cried, tears rolling down my face, looking at it going, well, bitch, you called it. Like,
Yeah.
I will say I stayed up all night and I
Yeah,
was
we did.
crying at 3 a.m. But I will say this, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. I want to say it. We don't have to talk about it, but I am not confident that it was an above board election.
Yeah.
at first, I didn't really worry about that, but now I totally agree.
100%. But having said that, we have to deal with what we have to deal with right now. So I want to do a little summary because I don't want to take up too much of your time. Susan, I got to tell you, this has been awesome.
It's been fun, yeah.
These are some of the takeaways I took. You were talking about engage, don't argue. And we actually had someone who's made a comment that we just need to get the information out there. We don't have to debate it. We don't have to argue it. We don't have to try and convince anybody. And I like how you've reframed it with engage. I love how you say that the people that we're trying to talk to who are pushing back so much that are MAGA, they're just trying to survive, and they're tired. They get tired of being scared all the time. And as in the same way that Harris gave us hope, Trump has given them hope.
Yeah. Just because we can't understand why that message appealed to them doesn't mean that it's not as effective appealing to them as ours was to us.
Exactly.
Their circumstances impartial dictate their receptivity to it.
100%. But I love the other thing that you said, that we have to be aware that MAGA uses the coordinated and unified democratic response to things that happen as a benchmark for whether or not it's bad.
Well,
And
I would call it more of a yardstick. Down here, you use yardstick to measure
yardstick.
how deep the hole is. And it, if it wasn't relevant at all, it wouldn't get used. But yes, I do believe that the fractured messaging and tepid unified response right now is contributing to the fact that a lot more of them are not as afraid of what's going on as we are.
Right, right. So having said all that, Aaron, do you have any last questions, last thoughts, anything you'd like?
No, so Susan, I just came off of reading a book called Digital Kindness. If you get a chance, check it out. I keep talking about this thing everywhere. But some of the stuff that you're saying, I think is just more feeds back into that, and it just into like
I
if
love
you
them.
yeah, like if you approach them on a more human level, you might, and I try to do that even more so now, to approach them on a human level and see if there's some kind of way to connect. But listening to your stories and reading the stuff you talk about, I mean, it gives you a totally different perspective on how, not all, but how probably most of the people that voted Trump in office, about how they feel or why they voted that way. It's super interesting. And, thanks for coming on. Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I've really enjoyed getting to talk about some of these issues that really weigh on me. I'm not trying to say that I'm a barometer of everything here in the South, but I live and work and survive just like they are in all this. And I understand a lot of the fear and the just throw your hands up and pick one and commit and roll with it. Desperation does that to people. So I think if there were a way to we could find that could address that, it would change a lot of things. My way of trying to do that is by not doing like I did before and shutting down and just stereotyping and cutting ties. Because while that can be satisfying at that point, it's not going to change things, and there will be regrets later for those who
Right.
haven't yet.
Right.
So opening dialogues and being respectful. You can disagree respectfully with somebody. And when you do, they respect you enough that they're open to listening to you again. And over time, those seeds get planted. And even if they didn't believe you right then, it might cause them to go research more
Yeah.
and eventually come to a different conclusion on their own.
Well, and I'm going to capitalize on that and build on that to let people know that you have agreed to come on and be a regular guest. We're going to do a series with you called Respectful Resistance. And it's basically going to be your stories of how you're bridging divides, one conversation at a time. And so we are so excited.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I am too. That would be a really nice way for people that read the thread stories to get to learn a little bit of more about that person and maybe try to figure out why they did what they did, because it's a lot harder to do in threads. So I really greatly appreciate that opportunity. I'm all about hopeful resistance myself. We all need hope, but
Yeah.
there's also a corner there where hopeful does contain being respectful, because as we say here in the South, honey draws more flies than vinegar.
Yeah.
It will work. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much for giving me that invitation. I greatly appreciate it.
We are just super grateful that you came on today. And if nobody else has anything to say, for those of you who've been watching, thank you so much for joining us. And until we get together again, bye for now.